Ever since I could remember, the Dunny Man had come running down the driveway once a week. From inside the house we could hear his running footsteps. Then we could hear the rattle and thump as he lifted the lavatory, took out the full pan, clipped on a special lid, and set down an empty pan in its place. After more rattling and banging, there was an audible intake of breath as he hefted the full pan onto his shoulder. Then the footsteps went back along the driveway, slower this time, but still running. From outside in the street, there was rattling, banging, and shouting as the full pan was loaded onto the dunny cart with all the other full pans. I often watched the dunny cart from the front window. As it slowly made its noisome way along the street, the Dunny Man ran to and from it with awesome expertise. They wore shorts, sand shoes, and nothing else except a suntan, suspiciously deep on the forearms. Such occasional glimpses were all one was allowed by one's parents, and all that was encouraged, even by the Dunnymen themselves. They preferred to work in no other company but their own. They were a band apart. Years went by without those running footsteps being acknowledged by any other means except a bottle of beer left standing in the lavatory on the closest visiting day to Christmas Day. Otherwise, it seemed generally agreed that the lavatory pan was changed by magic. From day to day it got fuller and fuller, generating maggots by about the third day. To combat the smell, honeysuckle was grown on a trellis outside the lavatory door, in the same way that the European nobility had recourse to perfume when they travelled by galley. The maggots came from blowflies, and more blowflies came from the maggots. Blowflies were called blowies. The Australian climate, especially on the eastern seaboard in the latitude of Sydney, was specially designed to accommodate them. The blowies' idea of a good time was to hang around the dunny waiting for the seat to be lifted. They were then faced with the challenge of getting through the hole before it was blocked by the descending behind of the prospective occupant. There was no time for any fancy flying. Whether parked on the wall or stacking around in a holding pattern near the ceiling, every blowy was geared up to make either a vertical dive from high altitude or a death-defying low-level run through the rapidly decreasing airspace between the seat and your descending rear. The moment the seat came up, it was Pearl Harbor. Once inside, enclosed under a dark sky, the blowies set about dumping their eggs. The memory of the results has always in my mind given extra vividness to Shakespeare's line about life in excrements. God knows what would have happened if ever the Dunny Men went on strike. Even as things were, by the end of the week, the contents of the pan would be getting too close for comfort. Luckily, the Dunny Man was a model of probity. Never putting a foot wrong, he carried out his Sisyphean task in silent loyalty. Only when he was about to leave our lives forever did his concentration slip. Perhaps he foresaw that one day the sewer would come to everywhere in the world. Perhaps, in order to ward off these grim thoughts, he partook of his Christmas beer while still engaged in the task. Because it was on that day, the day before Christmas Eve, that the Dunny Man made his solitary mistake. My mother and I were having breakfast. I heard the Dunny Man's footsteps thumping along the driveway with a silent pause as he hurdled my bicycle, which, in my habitual carelessness, I had left lying there. I heard the usual thumps, bangs, and heaves. I could picture the brimming pan, secured with the special clipped lid, hoisted high on his shoulder, while he held my mother's gift bottle of beer in his other, appreciative hand. Then the footsteps started running back the other way. Whether he forgot about my bicycle or simply mistimed his jump, there was no way of telling. Suddenly, there was the noise of, well, it was mainly the noise of a Dunny Man running full tilt into bicycle. The uproar was made especially ominous by the additional noise, tiny but significant in context, of a clipped lid springing off. While my mother sat there with her hands over her eyes, I raced out through the fly-screen door and took a look down the driveway. The Dunny Man overwhelmed by the magnitude of his tragedy, had not yet risen to his feet. Needless to say, the contents of the pan had been fully divulged. All the stuff had come out. But what was really remarkable was how none of it had missed him. Already you could hear a gravid hum in the air. Millions of flies were on their way towards us. They were coming from all over Australia. For them, it was a durbar, a moot, a gathering of the clans. For us, it was the end of an era.